robotman.com.au.
G'day, Robot Man here. I've been teaching robotics for over 30 years. This whole video is designed for people who use Spike Prime, especially teachers or anyone who's had a few issues with it who'd like to solve those problems. Well, back in 2020, I purchased a whole bunch of Spike Prime sets. Since then, I've learned a lot about Spike Prime, and I want to share that with you because I don't want you to make the same mistakes I did. And also, I want to save you some time and some worry and some headaches. The first thing I want to talk about is how to organize your equipment. Now, when I first started, I made this video up here on how to get organized, and it's been pretty handy for a lot of people. The main thing I did was to label everything. To label every hub, I had 10 kits, so I labeled them A to J using a label maker like this. And I also labeled all the tubs, and I labeled all my iPads. That's right, all my devices I got labeled because I wanted to match my device to my hub every single time. So if you have a device that matches the hub, it's far less likely to ask for updates and that sort of thing. I label all my motors with the letters because I collect my motors at the end of every session as well, so that at the start of every session, the kids have already got all the motors they need without having to look for anything. Occasionally, if you don't label them and they just end up anywhere, then you might end up losing them and the kids aren't really accountable. But if they're labeled and they put them on top of the kit at the end, then you can see straight away if any are missing. So label all the important parts, like the hub and the motors and all the sensors, and only put the sensors out that they need. Otherwise, you'll find that you might lose some or spend a lot of time looking for them at least. Inside every hub, there is a lithium battery that needs charging, obviously. It can stay inside the hub, no worries. But I found that I collect all the hubs up, then I can charge them all at one time. I've got a 10-port charger that charges all my hubs. But what you should know is that you need to charge your batteries at least once every 3 months. If you haven't charged them for a while, you need to charge them now, because the life of the battery will last a lot longer if you charge them at least every 3 months. You don't even have to pull your robots apart to charge your batteries. I mean, most of my workshops, the kids make something and pull it apart on the same day. But if you've got projects in your classroom that are there for a few days and you need to charge the batteries, you should be able to work out how to charge your robot without even pulling apart the robot. When I first bought my robotics kits from Spike Prime, I bought the expansion packs as well. So the expansion packs are pretty good value and you get a lot of extra bits. But where do you put them? This is the problem that I had. They didn't quite fit in the original box very well. So what I did was I kind of worked out all the pieces that I used the most, and I made a special image and stuck it on top of the tubs so the kids could sort out all the pieces that were used the most. And then I collected all the bits that weren't used very much and I put them in a couple of other tubs. So at the start of every session, you can pour those 2 tubs out onto the ground, onto a blanket perhaps, so you can pick them up easy at the end. But it just saves having too much stuff in the tub, a lot of pieces that they just didn't use very often. And then if it's spread out on the floor, then kids can come and go and find bits. If they really want to have a look through those bits, they can. Otherwise, they can just stick to what's in the tub. So I reckon that's a good idea, not to have too much stuff in the tubs, because some pieces are obviously a lot more useful than others. I've actually made a video on here called Get Organised. It's some good tips on how to first get started if you haven't organised your stuff yet. The piece I use the most is probably those tiny little black pieces, the little tiny black pins. If you want to order more of those, the actual part number is 2780. And I like to use lots of those. I go through a lot of those pins. In fact, I've probably got those pins scattered all over the state of Tasmania because they're very little and they get lost easy. If they do get lost, you can replace them. I go to a website called brickowl.com to buy parts, because they have sellers from all over the world who will sell individual parts of Lego, and those little pins are available. They're about $1 each if you go to brickowl.com. There's another piece that I use a lot, and that's those pieces with 4 pins in them called a Technic pin connector, perpendicular. They're very useful for making robots, and they're nice and strong. They make your robot nice and strong if you use those pins a lot. So grab some of those if you haven't got enough of them at brickowl.com. So the best way to start building a vehicle, for example, with Lego Spike Prime, is to grab a couple of motors, and you need to use a plate or a frame, and you attach the motors to the frame. That's a really good way to start. So just put the motors on a frame or on a plate, and using those little black pins I was just talking about. And if you want the robot to spin or turn, then it's good to use a ball and socket instead of 4 wheels. A lot of kids think they've got to use 4 wheels to make a car, but sometimes it's better just to use a ball and socket, because that will turn in any direction really easily. Something that I emphasize when kids are building cars, if they want the car to go straight, you've really got to make it symmetrical. So you try and put the ball and socket in the middle and try and make everything very balanced on both sides. So it's very symmetrical and it should go straighter. And often if you're building a car and you want it to go straight, I put the ball and socket at the back and put the movement motors at the front, because it seems to go straighter than having the ball dig into the ground, like into the carpet or that sort of thing. When you're racing cars, a lighter car that doesn't weigh as much is often better than a heavy car. And if you're battling, then heavier cars do better, okay? Sometimes people want to use cogs, little cogs, to make the wheels turn faster. So you're going to gear up their robot. This is pretty cool. It does take a bit of time though, so only use cogs if you've got a fair bit of time at this speed. But if you put a small cog on the actual wheel and a large cog on the motor, then the wheel will turn really fast. If you do the opposite, then the wheel will turn slow. But the slower it turns using that method, the more torque or power it will have. So if you put a big cog on the wheel, but a small cog on the motor, then you will end up with a car or vehicle that goes very slow but has more power. It's good if you want to make something that goes uphill or something that needs to lift a lot of weight. Anyway, cogs are awesome and they can change the strength or speed of your motors, but you need time to be able to line things up and do it. And whatever you do to one motor, you should do another one. I think some people want to fiddle with cogs and make one motor turn 2 wheels, but I think it's better to have a motor on each wheel, but have whatever you do to one motor, then do the exact same to the other motor. So you've got 2 separate sets of cogs turning 2 separate wheels. A lot of people have contacted me with problems with their device because something has gone wrong and their kit's not working. Robot man, my robot's not working. Well, a lot of it comes down to your device. Now, I've already mentioned that you should have the same device matched to the same hub. So always connect the same device to the same hub. And that'll save a few problems, especially with updating and things. It always wants to update. If you change devices with the hub, it'll want to update it, which is annoying. But anyway, I just get my kids to use iPads. I've got older iPads. I've got iPad 5s and iPad 6s, and they both work really well with Spike Prime. I'm currently using Spike 3, and they work really well with that. You don't need to have the latest device to run the Spike software, but once you've got it working, it's a really good idea not to update it much, because every time you update it, it can cause as many problems as it solves. Sometimes it can. So if you find that your kits are working well and your robot's working well and your device is working well with Spike Prime, then I wouldn't bother updating it. What's the point, really? So I don't really, once it's working well, I don't update it anymore. The good thing about the Spike 3 is that I've found that it makes things run a lot quicker. So it'll connect to your robot. When you press Bluetooth and you search for a robot, it connects almost instantaneously. And it downloads just your program that you've made to your hub really quickly, and it will run it quicker. So it is quicker, more efficient. But some people have had a few problems with connecting to Bluetooth after they've updated. So I've made a few videos that you can check out. Check out my channel for how to deal with issues regarding connectivity with your hub using Bluetooth and that sort of thing. If you have any issues, check out my other videos. Occasionally, while kids are working on their iPads, the iPad just freezes for some reason, and they can't do anything. So the solution to that is just to close the app and reopen it, and their code will still be there. It's interesting though, because sometimes when kids' code seems to be playing up and not working, often it's because they press play and stop too quickly. They press play, they want it to play, but it doesn't play, so they press it again, Encourage them not to do that. Encourage them to be patient when they press play once, just wait for it to do its thing. But if you find that the code seems corrupted or not working properly or not behaving itself or having issues, it's good just to close the app and reopen it. And sometimes I've even suggested that they do a screenshot of their code and start a new program and just do it again. So actually rewrite the code in a new project, because I reckon sometimes it gets a bit corrupted behind the scenes and you can't really see why it's playing up. But if you rewrite it in a new program, if in a new project, then it should work. Sometimes I've even deleted the app on purpose because it's been playing up, and then reinstalled the app. But if you do that, there's a chance you might end up with a different version to all your other devices. One solution could be to back up your whole device. That's what I often do. I back up my entire iPad. If everything's working well, I'll back it up, and then when I want to reinstall an app, I just reinstall the whole image of the whole iPad. It takes a little bit of time, but you know it's going to work because it's the same image on an iPad that's working. So, and if it's still not working, then it's probably the iPad itself, and you might need to get a new iPad. But you know, if you use iPads, that is. I think it'd work the same for computers too. You know? If you've got a computer that's playing up all the time, sometimes it might be good just to re-image it, as you probably know, if you're a computer nerd like me. Yeah. Made a few videos about coding. The main tip I have for coding when it comes to movement motors that move at the same time, is that you have to start your stack of blocks by using the block that says set movement motors. You need to make sure that the hub knows which ports you're plugging the motors into. So always, when you want to make a car, something or vehicle that moves, you always set the movement motors first. And that block stays at the #1 position the whole time. Don't move it, don't delete it, and make sure the letters match the ports that you plug the motors into. Okay. And then you need to set the speed. If you don't set the speed, then I think it defaults to about 75% speed, and that's fine, but you might want to change the speed later. But setting the speed's good. Something that's a little bit crazy, which drives me a bit nuts, is that you can actually type in any number you like into the speed. So you could even type in a speed of 9,999. But I've found if you type in a speed that's bigger than 100, then often it gets a little corrupted or misbehaves. In other words, sometimes it doesn't go straight. If you've got a car and you want it to go straight, it won't go straight if the speed's higher than 100. And sometimes it even causes it to freeze or get confused or stop working altogether. So I strongly advise people not to do speeds bigger than 100. The reason why you can, I'm sure, is because so you can add other formulas and stuff in there, but encourage your people not to do speeds bigger than 100 because it can cause issues. I reckon 99 or less is good. When we're talking about pink blocks, and you can choose how long motors turn for, you might say seconds, you might say rotations, you might say degrees. Just remember that degree, I've said to kids, I want you to make a robot that turns around 180 degrees. And they think if they select 180 degrees in the code, it will make the robot turn 180 degrees, but it doesn't, because it's just how far the wheel turns, not how far the robot turns. So just remember that your students or the people around you know that degrees is not how far the robot turns. Like you can't make it robot turn 90 degrees by selecting degrees. Okay, that's how far the wheels turn around. And it often depends on how long the wheels turn for as well. So I often encourage them to move, when they're talking about movement, move based on seconds, because that's something that kids can relate to really easily. Make your car go for 10 seconds and then stop. Because centimeters is a little inaccurate because it depends on how big the wheels are and other things. And degrees obviously is a bit confusing. Rotations is a bit hard to understand, how many times the wheels rotate. I think kids often think, oh, it's a lot easier to make calculations in seconds. So if something doesn't quite go far enough, you just add a couple of seconds or take a couple of seconds off or whatever. So seconds are good, I reckon. Yeah. Often when you're turning, you need to select how sharp the turn is. And it's a bit confusing because it looks like it should be degrees, sort of like when you change that little dial there, it looks like it should be degrees. But I've decided that I often just say, look, a sharp turn of 100 means it's going to spin. It means the robot will virtually spin on the spot. So 100 means it spins, but the lower the number, the more wider the turn is. So if you want something to turn quickly, you use 100. But if you want it to turn around a bit wider, you use a lower number like 30. That can be a bit confusing because the sharpness of a turn all depends on how long it turns for, doesn't it? So you could do a really sharp turn, but if it only turns for half a second, it's not going to turn much at all anyway. So it's a bit hard. It's a lot of trial and error involved in those sorts of turns. In fact, I kind of like using the extra block you can add. A lot of you would know you can go down to the menu, choose more movement blocks, and you can add a block that has like 2 percentages in it. 1 percentage for one wheel, 1 percentage for another wheel. So if it's going at 50 and minus 50, it means one wheel will go forwards and one wheel will go backwards. And that means it will turn. It'll spin on the spot. The robot will spin if the wheels are opposite each other. So you can put in any value like 100 and minus 100, or 100 and negative 100 if you want to be specific. And then that means one wheel will turn forwards and one will turn backwards. Or you can just do a speed like 30 and 80, and that means it will do a bit of an arc. It will turn in a circle but might not spin. Yeah, but it all comes down to how long it spins for, how long you turns for. It also depends on how far apart your wheels are, how long your robot is, and all sorts of things like that. 3 ways you can get your robot to go the opposite way. Like a lot of people build a car or vehicle and it goes backwards and they want it to go forwards. So there's 3 ways that I've discovered that you can make your wheels turn the other way. And these are pretty obvious of some of you, but it's important that the kids know that you can just change the arrow on the code. If you want to make it go backwards, you can change the arrow to the opposite direction. But if there are a lot of arrows in your code, then you want to change all of them to do the opposite. Another way is to make the speed a negative number. So if you make a speed a minus number, a negative number, then the motors will turn the other way. And the third way, which I've come to the conclusion is the best way, is just to swap the wires around. So if your movement motors are plugged into A and B, pull them out of A and B and swap them around so that A is now in B and B is now in A, in other words. So if you just swap the wires around, your motors will go the other way, which is pretty cool and pretty easy. And you don't have to change your code, hopefully. I made a good video on how to make your robot turn, including how to use the gyro sensor. So check out this video if you want to make your robot turn. Sometimes when you're coding, it can get rather complicated if you're using lots of if and then and else's and stuff. So sometimes I encourage the kids just to build different stacks of code. So every time you've got a block of code that's all in one stack, that's called a stack. And if you build 4 stacks, for example, you could say at the start, when program starts, make the car go forward. And you could also say when the program starts, if it sees a red wall, it needs to turn right. And when the program starts, if it sees a yellow wall, it needs to turn left. And when the program starts, when the touch sensor is bumped, it needs to go backwards, whatever. So you can make separate stacks for every command. And when you press play, then all the stacks run at the same time. So that's a pretty cool tip, especially if kids are playing with things like sounds and lights and things. You don't want your car to stop so it can play a sound out of the iPad, or you don't want your car to stop so some message can come up on the screen. So it's good to build another stack just for the lights and sounds, so that when the program starts, it does all the things it's supposed to do, but then it can do the fancy things on the side as well. Yeah. When a robot doesn't work, the first thing I check is to see that the letters haven't been duplicated in another block somewhere. In other words, if they've set the movement motors to A and B, and they've got their movement motors plugged into A and B, but there's a third motor plugged into some other port, but on the code it says it's plugged into A or B, then it's not going to work because it's going to get confused. So just make sure that every single motor is represented accurately in the code. Otherwise, if it's there twice, like with a blue block and a pink block, then it's not going to work because it can't distinguish between the two. It gets confused, which is movement, which is just a normal motor going by itself. I seem to have gone through a lot of motors. A lot of my motors just stopped working after a while, and I used to pull my hair out, as you can tell, as to why my motors don't work anymore. And I made a video on 14 reasons why your motors don't work. And one of those reasons, I think, was the main reason. And it involves those little clips that you can stick on your cables to stop them from getting tangled. And I think those little clips damage the robot. And the reason I think that is because twice now, I was building robots with kids and the cables were getting tangled, and I'd say, go get a clip. And the iPad was right there, and I just tapped on the connect tab, which shows you all the ports and everything. When they put the clip on the cable, the motor just disappeared from the iPad. So it was like someone had unplugged it, but it wasn't unplugged. It was still plugged in, and it didn't work anymore. Twice that's happened. So I believe that those little clips actually damaged the cables. And I took them all, I collected them all, and I've got them stored away, and I never want to use them again because I think they damaged the cables. When you think about it, you have to kind of force them on, and it's a bit rough, and I think it just causes damage, and I don't like those little clips. So stop using the clips, and your motors might behave themselves a bit better. Sometimes I think also the motors might even overheat. I've seen kids that have used their robot a lot in a class, and towards the end of the class it just keeps shutting down and the robot won't work. And I think it's because they overuse the motors, and the next day the motors seem fine, but during the lesson, if they've used it heaps, like some kids have, we've done racing robots, and they've raced and raced and raced, but they've even created celebrations for the robot, like spinning and stuff at the end. If they've used it too much, then the motors often, I think, they overheat. I don't know. Maybe that's not true, but it seems to be logical in my sense, where the more they get used, the more likely they are to stop working that lesson. Okay, you know those little paper absorption packs, those things with crystals in them that absorb water? Well, I've added them to my robotic kits because I think sometimes the connectors where the robot's hub connects to the motor, I think the little bits on the end of the motor get a little bit rusty sometimes. So I've decided to put those absorption packs in all my boxes of motors, and even in the kits, because I think little rusty connection points are no good, and I think that's one reason why some of the motors stop working. And in my 14 reasons why the motors don't work, showed you how I clean them with an electric toothbrush. Keeping the cables clean and dry, I think, is really important. When it comes to teaching robotics, don't think you have to know everything. I never knew everything. In fact, most of what I've learned, kids have taught me. Look, all you need to do is be responsible for the equipment and give them some ideas and a bit of a nudge in the right direction, and they'll come up with solutions to problems. You don't need to have all the answers. It's good that if you can solve problems when they come up, like why things aren't working, but hopefully I've covered most of that in this video. You need to make sure that you are not scared to teach robotics. There's nothing scary about it because the kids will be motivated and excited, and you can just get into it. Let the kids experiment. Okay, the thing about Lego is they've tried to make all these curriculum plans and lessons so everyone makes the same robot at the same time, like traditional following instructions step by step. But I don't like that, and most teachers wouldn't like that, because you don't want all the kids doing all the same things at the same time. You want them to be able to work at their own pace and use their own ideas and be creative and solve problems, that sort of thing. So open-ended problems are the way to go. Get the kids to build a race car. Who can build the fastest race car? I mean, don't just get them all to build the same dancing robot, for goodness sake. Where's the fun in that? Also, sometimes kids can't find the parts they're looking for. If you're following instructions and you can't find a part, it can be very frustrating. Sometimes when I've built things out of Lego following instructions, you spend like 10 minutes looking for one bit. Imagine a whole class full of bits. They're going to end up everywhere. So why get them to follow instructions? Why can't you just say, with the robotic kit that you've got, build a crane that can lift this lump of plasticine, and just see what the kids can come up with? Okay, it's much more exciting and interesting and educational if they can have open-ended problems. I think it's also good to have a little bit of competition involved. Like I mentioned, who can build a crane, or who can build a car, who can do this, who can make the best one. Don't make it too competitive, but make it competitive enough that motivate them to want to do their best. Okay, two of the most important things that I emphasize when I'm teaching is that you need to have respect for each other, and you need to have a respect for the equipment. But respect for each other is probably the most important one, because the kids need to be good sports. They need to encourage each other. They need to actually work well in a team. So often you've got kids working in groups of 2 or 3 with this stuff. You've got to make sure that they're good sports. You've got to emphasize how important it is to accept their teammates' ideas, and not to be bossy and not to be dominant, and actually share the responsibility of the task, and not just make the other person do everything, or not just dominate and let them do nothing. So respect for other people is important, and of course respect for the equipment is important too. I like to spend at least 5 minutes at the end of every session tidying up the kits, making them nice and tidy. I say to the class, I say, we're not going to tidy up for 1 minute, we're going to tidy up for 5 minutes. Okay, I want you to spend 5 minutes making your kit nice and tidy. And if you finished in 1 minute, I'm not impressed. It's not a race. This is not a race to see who can finish the quickest. I want to see who can make their kit the tidiest. And just let them have some respect for the equipment. Okay, and I say, if you're being rough with that, you can miss out. Sometimes I've had kids actually hit other people's robots in frustration and stuff. I say, right, you got to sit down over there and you watch for a while, because that's not how we treat other people, and that's not how we treat my equipment. So you've got to lay down the law, make it very clear. They'll benefit if they respect each other and they respect the equipment. Okay, and if they don't, then they're going to miss out. The greatest thing about coding and robotics, I reckon, is that no one gets it perfectly right the first time. There's a lot of trial and error involved. There's a lot of experimentation. There's a lot of risk involved. And there is a risk that they'll fail, that they won't do it properly. But if they persevere and they keep trying, they'll come up with some sort of solution. So the goal should be to persevere. The goal should be not to give up. If they can achieve that goal of not getting frustrated, but actually trying to get the job done, then they are a winner. No matter how well their robot performs against anyone else's, if they haven't given up, they're a winner. So please emphasize that, because it'll make a big difference. Some kids just aren't used to failing. Some kids just aren't used to not succeeding at the first try. So this is a really good chance for them to excel in perseverance, okay, and endurance, and having a go, mate. Yeah. If you found this video useful, it'd be great if you could subscribe, but also share this video with any teacher friends you have, or anyone who uses Spike Prime who might want a bit of a motivation to get stuck into it, because there's always a lot to learn, but hopefully this video has helped make things easier for you. I've got lots of plans to make more Spike Prime videos, so stay tuned to my channel. My channel's awesome. I've got mainly, on my main videos, it's all to do with Spike Prime, but if you look at my YouTube shorts, then you'll see highlights of all my workshops using my 6 different types of robots. Check them out and subscribe. See ya.